Hello and welcome to MEE Live. I'm Matilda Mallinson.
And I'm Mohammed Hashim. It's Tuesday, the 20th of January.
Today, everything you need to know about Syria's ceasefire deal. But first, the headlines.
Israel has spoken out against Donald Trump's Board of Peace, which is tasked with overseeing next steps in Gaza and bring new international players into the fold. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is pushing back against the inclusion of two senior officials from Turkey and Qatar. And French President Emmanuel Macron is reportedly declining to join the board over concerns it would claim extensive powers in Gaza and undermine the United Nations framework. The U.S. president threatened 200% tariffs on French wine. In response, he is due to unveil the board at the Davos Forum in Switzerland on Thursday.
India and the United Arab Emirates have signed a mega defense pact which deepens nuclear cooperation and makes India Abu Dhabi's largest buyer of natural gas. During a 3-hour visit in New Delhi on Monday, UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi set a goal of doubling bilateral trade to $200 billion by 2032. It comes as Turkey is lobbying to join a defense pact between Saudi Arabia and nuclear-armed Pakistan, a move that could create a new military bloc in the Middle East amid rising tensions in the Gulf and Iran. Stay tuned as we turn to Syria. Renewed bouts of fighting in northern Syria have dampened optimism over Sunday's ceasefire deal between Syrian government and Kurdish forces. Statues topple as several gun battles have been reported, in particular around a prison holding ISIS members in the town of al-Sharaa, with escapes leading to major security fears.
Now, the ceasefire secured significant territorial gains for the Syrian government over Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, after nearly 2 weeks of deadly fighting. This includes the oil and gas-rich provinces of Raqqa, Deir and Hasakah, stretching right into the country's northeast.
As part of the deal, Syria's President Ahmed al-Sharaa announced a 14-point plan to integrate the SDF into Syria's defences. He also issued a decree on Friday declaring Kurdish a national language and restoring citizenship to hundreds of thousands of Kurds in his ongoing bid to unify the country.
Now, the interim leader has faced a tumultuous year since overthrowing Bashar al-Assad's authoritarian rule in December 2024, including sectarian violence, incursions from Israel, and an economy ravaged by years of war and sanctions.
Coming up, we'll assess what the ceasefire deal means for Syria's future, as well as the proxy interests of Turkey, Israel, and the US. But first, who are the Kurds, and where does this deal leave them?
Well, the Kurds are one of the largest ethnic groups in the world who don't have a separate state. There are 30 to 40 million Kurds globally, spread across the Middle East with large diasporas in Europe, especially Germany. Indigenous to the border-lying territory connecting Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Armenia. They are divided into minorities in each country, and they have faced discrimination in all.
After World War I and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the Allied powers proposed an autonomous Kurdistan, but never followed through, and the land was carved up between British and French mandates before becoming the countries we know today.
During the Syrian civil war, Kurdish fighters joined a coalition called the Syrian Democratic Forces. They fought alongside U.S. allies against ISIS and separately against Turkish forces on the border. They eventually carved out Syrian territory that included most of the oil fields, important agricultural lands, and a dam used to generate key power across Syria.
Once ISIS was defeated, the US withdrew and left the SDF to face Turkish forces and other rebel groups on their own. Turkey views the SDF as terrorists, and since Sharaa took Damascus, the SDF and Syrian army have been clashing, which brings us on to this ceasefire.
Now, does this ceasefire bring Kurds in Syria rights or more repression? And what does it mean for Kurds across the region who have fought long and hard for autonomy?
We're joined now by Kamran Palani, expert on Kurdish politics from the LSE Middle East Centre. Welcome, Kamran, to MEE Live. Now, we have seen significant territorial losses for the SDF. Is this the end of the SDF? And what does it mean for Kurds in the region?
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity, but also thank you for the interesting introduction, which I think needed for such an important conversation. I think it's undeniable to say that SDF, as a significant, as a powerful Kurdish-led force in northeast Syria, has been significantly weakened over the past 2 weeks. And this is an empirical fact, an empirical observation, but the group still has significant military power, but also significant popular support that requires to be taken seriously about the future, at least of this part of Syria. But, you know, from the very beginning, the sustainability of the Kurdish-led northeast Syria has been largely dependent on the US support, the US presence on the ground. It's very obvious now, US is no longer interested in sustaining its military presence in this part of the country, and it's interesting in engaging with a new government in Damascus, which I'm going to talk about, its problems and shortcomings and issues, etc. So the core of the pillar of the Kurdish autonomy in northeast Syria is gone for now, and it's very difficult for them to remain relevant, to remain significant in Syrian and regional politics without having significant US support, not in terms of military support, but also in terms of deterring others from attacking them, etc.
And so how has that left the Kurdish community in the region feeling? You talk about the military losses, but also the vulnerabilities from a security perspective. And there's also their status within this new Syrian country. You know, al-Sharaa has issued a decree recognizing Kurdish culture and rights. Nowruz, which is Kurdish New Year's, that's been declared a national holiday. There's talk as well of a Kurdish governor in Hasakah. Are these concessions enough? How are Kurds in the region feeling?
The reason I liked your introduction was that it wasn't about a specific political party. It was about the Kurds as an ethnic, collective, distinct group in the Middle East. So the question I've been trying to raise over the past few days is that very few people in mainstream media, among think tank community, in political organizations, have asked the questions, what Kurds really want in Syria and beyond. And this is a very important question. I don't think al-Sharaa has asked this question, what Kurds want in Syria. Instead, they have tried to decide what is best for them. So let me make it clear about what Kurds want. But this is an opportunity for us to understand the Kurdish issue in the Middle East that has been ongoing over the past century. The Kurds want to be recognized as a distinct and collective group with the right to have the political status within the existing.
Are you talking about a situation like
realities?
So just to clarify, are you talking about a situation of autonomy within Syria, for example, as we see in Iraq, where Kurds in Iraq have a certain amount of political autonomy, or are you talking here about a Kurdish state that's separate from all of these countries?
What is really important to say, the Kurds in Syria never officially asked for an independent state. They have never declared this is their objective. I would be surprised if someone shared with me an official statement from the Syrian Kurds that their final objective is an independent state. They have always declared that, demonstrate clearly that they want a decentralization. They want a decentralized administration within a unified, decentralized federal Syria. This is a very important to say. They have never called for independence to be justified as being separatists. They have called for autonomy within the unified Syria. This is important. Second, I don't think al-Sharaa has so far asked this question what Kurds want. And instead, if he analyzed the decree that was issued by him a few days ago, granting Kurds certain rights, it's all about individual rights. It's all about universal individual rights. You can have access to your own language, your national holidays, etc. So this is not what Kurds want. Kurds want a political status of their own in their own region. That's why I believe the most realistic suggestion for political settlement in Syria is a recognition of the Kurdish autonomy in the current areas. It was very predictable and realistic to say that the Kurds couldn't for long occupy the lands of others, that Kurds are not the majority there. I'm referring to Raqqa, Deir and other places. But the core objective has always been maintaining their autonomy in Kurdish majority regions. If this is guaranteed, I think it would be a realistic solution for political settlement for the future of Syria. Let me tell you something.
Well, I just want to follow up, because you said so within this framework of Syrian unity and Kurdish autonomy within Syria, you did just say also that this could be a really interesting model for the region. And I want to ask about whether there are wider implications for Kurds across the region. We've seen Kurdish demonstrations breaking out in Turkey, for example, in Iraq, against violence against Kurds in Syria. Does this ceasefire deal have wider implications for Kurds across the region?
First of all, I've never seen Kurds as united as they are today when it comes to developments in Syria and other parts of the region. So there is a significant unity among the Kurds around what Kurds deserve, what Kurds want in Syria. If in the past fragmentation, internal divisions were used as justifications to deny the Kurds from their own rights, and I think at the moment there is a significant unity, even among the groups that are rivals to each other, among the such as the KDP, PKK, and all of these groups. There is a consensus about the prospect, and this will take me to your previous question about what Kurds have in Iraq that can be also a model for what Kurds can have elsewhere. It's millions of Kurds observe the developments in the region. Kurds have deep fear of a centralized authority. In Iraq, the situation was very different in 2003. The Shia Arab majority, though they are the majority in terms of statistics and demographics, but they have been marginalized for centuries, and they have looked at themselves they look at themselves as a minority in a Sunni Arab majority region. So it was very easier for Kurds to negotiate decentralization, power sharing, inclusion with the Shia Arab majority in Iraq. But in Syria, the dynamics are very different. In addition to this, all of the regional powers
I'm afraid we're short of time,
Syria,
so I'm going to have to wrap you up there. But thank you so much for joining us here on MEE with a case for greater Kurdish autonomy within unified Syria. Now, next we look at the regional and geopolitical implications. Over to Mohammed.
Now, tensions between the Syrian government and the Kurdish-led SDF have been escalating, which is fueling fears of a collapse of a major ceasefire agreement announced just days ago. To make sense of all this, we're joined by Orwa Ajoub, a Syrian research analyst based in Sweden.
Me.
Absolutely. Orwa, I want to start off with a big picture kind of question. Why was this ceasefire agreement announced? Let's start there.
We're talking about the recent one, which happened just a couple of hours ago. Let's think about how everything started. The very beginning, that Damascus realized at some point that the way to consolidate power is to pressure SDF to go into a deal, which never happened for various reasons. And this is what we saw in Sheikh Maqsoud, and we saw in Aleppo, Eastern Aleppo. So Damascus forces entered these areas, and there was a tacit agreement with the US and, of course, with the support of Ankara. The SDF was pressured for a deal, and then at some point, they realized that they cannot really, they didn't have a room for maneuver, and therefore a confrontation with Damascus was imminent. And I think the ceasefire came after realization that Damascus could go further, but at the same time, there was concerns about what the Syrian army or the governmental forces and the tribal forces could maybe commit as atrocities against the Kurdish people in the areas of operation. There was a there was a call between President Trump and President Bashar yesterday, and I think the call was an important sign that the US was really concerned about how things would go from there, and there was a pressure on the SDF. And I think that the deal was the materialization of all these pressures and diplomacy that was taking place regionally and globally.
And how do you feel about it, Orwa? Do you feel like it will hold?
I think that's the big question. Like when the rubber meets the road, everything it changes, because what we know is that Mazloum Abdi, at least the head of SDF, is more interested in having a deal with the Syrian government. However, as everyone knows so far, is that Mazloum Abdi is not the only one who calls shot in the SDF. Of course, there are links to the PKK, there are links to the Kandil leadership, which also has influence on the decision-making process. As you saw before, there was a deal, and then the deal was breached. We don't know who breached the deal first, the Syrian government or the SDF. They traded accusations, but something we know for sure, that there is no unified decision-making process in the SDF.
Speaking of the accusations, Orwa, I mean, the accusations were being traded between the government and the SDF over the release of Islamic State fighters, ISIS fighters. But what's at stake here? What happens to these prisons that housed a lot of these ISIS fighters?
I mean, that's the big question here, not only for Syria, but also for the international community, generally speaking. We are talking about at least more than 20,000 fighters. We're talking about more than dozens of thousands of family members and children and wives of ISIS fighters. These prisons, they are spread across northeast Syria. Some of it is, I mean, everyone's talking today about Al-Hol camp, for example, which hosts the families of ISIS members. So SDF just left them. I mean, they said that they couldn't protect them anymore. The Syrian government is trying to contain the damage. There are also a Shaddadi prison. There is the Gueran prisons. All these prisons which hold ISIS prisoners are security risks for the whole region, right? So now the US is pressuring everyone to contain the situation. SDF had this card as a bargaining chips, because the whole existence, let's not forget that the whole existence of SDF rests on the idea that they are fighting ISIS and that are taking care of ISIS prisoners. And now if the Syrian government is stealing the thunder of SDF when it comes to this fight, SDF has no reason to exist. We're talking about thousands of fighters, not most of them, but we have senior figures of ISIS who are detained there. They present security risk. They might be joining the group again. They might be part of the new operation of the group in the region and worldwide.
And we've just been seeing the SDF call for resistance, for protests to defend Kurdish rights. I mean, what did you make of that, these protests that have come out in response to that statement? And I guess there's a bigger question here, Orwa, in terms of if the Kurds in Syria trust the SDF in defending Kurdish rights in the country.
I agree with you. This is something that even President al-Sharaa talked about and the Syrian government talked about. There should be, this understanding should be there all the time to differentiate between the Kurds and SDF. SDF is a de facto authority that has been leading northeast Syria since 2014, 2015. And the Kurds have existed in Syria for a long time. Now, the thing is that when you think about, for example, the Syrian regime, right? So not every Alawite is part of the Syrian regime, but Alawites and were the backbone of the Syrian security apparatus. And now you think about it the same, that many Kurds maybe have enjoyed better living conditions just because they are Kurds, but they haven't been treated as first-class citizens. But again, the Arabs have been discriminated for a long time by the Kurdish SDF, by the Kurdish-led SDF. So I think what's important here is that the SDF is trying to make the case that it represents the Kurds, and the Syrian government is trying to say otherwise. And of course, the media plays a major role in shaping the whole environment. So many media close to SDF have been depicting the pictures that Kurds are experiencing extreme groups that is there to slaughter them. And therefore, you saw Kurds across the Middle East protesting to protect them. However, I think that we might be able to reach a less bloody solution within 4 days with the New Deal coming out today.
And just on that note, Alway, there has been reports of Arab tribes basically in favor of the government advance who were under the Kurdish-led areas in Syria. Isn't that correct?
Yes, definitely, 100%. I mean, the idea of SDF was formed by majority Arabs fighters for one single reason, because SDF had its own compulsory military conscriptions. So most of the Arabs men, they were forced to join the SDF. Additionally, those who have joined voluntarily, like to be part of the administration, they perceived the SDF as the de facto authority. I've been working on Northeast Syria and Northwest Syria for the last 7-8 years, and I've done extensive interviews with fighters from SDF who explicitly told me that they view SDF as a de facto authority, and the moment SDF collapsed, they will just take part of demolishing it. So they were already ready. They didn't really need a push from the Syrian government. However, the Syrian government played role through its own tribal connections to basically flip them against the SDF.
And I need to ask you about foreign actors or foreign players as well, Orwa. Let me ask you this. Where do you see the US in all of this? Where do you see Israel in all of this? And where do you see Turkey? So US, Israel, Turkey.
Yeah, of course. The US has endorsed President Bashar since day one. I mean, this has been clear from last year. And also the US had the plan to withdraw its forces from the Middle East, to channel its energy into the Pacific and into China. And this has been going on. This has been President Trump's discourse for a long time now. So they wanted to leave Syria. And they want to Syria unified because more stability, less security threat by ISIS and other groups. Also, Turkey is online. We know that there's this personal diplomacy and this bromance between President Trump and President Erdogan. And of course, President Erdogan, needless to say, he has been waiting for this moment since 2014, since the establishment of the Syrian Democratic Forces, because let's not forget that the PKK is very much perceived by Turkey as the biggest security threat. Now, when it comes to Israel, on the other hand, Israel has been very skeptical about the new regime in Syria. And we saw, for example, how it carried operation against the Syrian government forces in Suwaida a couple of months ago, when the Syrian forces tried to forcibly impose order in Suwaida and bring it under the central authority. However, from the leaks we have seen so far, that there was a meeting between, the meeting was public, but the leaks were released lately, that in Paris, Syrian government officials met with Israeli officials. There was Hakan Fidan, the foreign minister of Turkey, also was there. And what we saw is that there was some sort of tacit agreement that Israel will not intervene in Syrian government operation towards the SDF. And also in the south, we have Suwaida, we have Dar'a, we have Quneitra. These three regions or these three provinces will be in a way or another under the influence of Israel, demilitarized zone until further discussions. So I think Israel is on board on this. So we have Israel, we have Turkey, we have the US all on board on this. Otherwise, I mean, the SDF has been a reliable partner for fighting ISIS with the US and the international community. And I just see no reasons for basically endorsing the Syrian government military advancement into northeast Syria if there was not an agreement on that.
Interesting take, and we're gonna keep seeing how this situation develops. Orwa Ajoub, thank you so much for joining us to make sense of the situation.
Thank you for having me.
And for today, that is all that we have time for. But before we lose you, we would love to hear from you.
Please send in your thoughts and questions to @MiddleEastEye on any social platform or email meelive@middleeasteye.net.
We'll be here at 5 p.m. GMT, noon if you're in New York, every Tuesday and Thursday.
See you then.